A nation divided against itself, a republic under siege from within. Has the United States ever truly been united? PBS presents Preserving Democracy, Pursuing a More Perfect Union, a 2-hour documentary special. Join us as we explore the evolving story of American democracy, past, present, and future.
Welcome to NNPA and Black Press USA. I'm your host, Taylor Thomas. Welcome to 2022. Yes, I realize my Christmas tree is still up. I'm one of those people that keep it up for an extra week or two. Today is a very special day in this country, and maybe not something that is joyous, obviously, and to celebrate for some anyway. It is the first anniversary of the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. The clip that you just saw there is a PBS documentary that is going to air tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have the PBS app, your access to it is available at 8 p.m. tonight. I am bringing on one of the participants for this 2-hour-long documentary on the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. The program in itself is entitled Preserving Democracy and Pursuing a More Perfect Union. Ladies and gentlemen, now I'd like to introduce Dr. Marcia Chaterlain. She is also a Georgetown University professor. She is the winner of the 2021 Pulitzer Prize for History. So we thank you for you coming on the show, for your insightful information. And there's so much that we need to get into in this 30-minute block of time. But again, I want to remind everyone that's tuning in now here on NNPA that this is a PBS program. It'll be available tonight, January 6th at 8 p.m. on the app, and then 9 p.m. on the actual network channel. And it is Preserving Democracy, Pursuing a More Perfect Union. Dr. Chatelain, thank you. And we are appreciative to have your insightful information. I got a chance to see this. And the first thing I thought about, there's been a lot of talk. We know that lawmakers on the Hill are calling and summoning and subpoena various members, trying to get an answer to how this happened and perhaps how it could be prevented. But this PBS program, the documentary that's about to air tonight, if you've had any question about why this is important, I think you should stop and make sure that you watch this because you'll understand. I mean, you guys really went back and then you brought us to the present day.
Yes, I think that for many people who witnessed the horrors of January 6th, the question was, what created that moment? It wasn't just a single day and a group of people who had a spontaneous thought to attack the Capitol. I think it was the sum total of several years of rhetoric, of a culture of misinformation, a media landscape that enabled some of the worst of that, and this explosion that was unfolding in real time. So in many ways, I think the documentary gets at the historical roots as well as the contextual realities that gave birth to January 6th.
Now, there are a number of people, not many that have the title, obviously, of the 2021 Pulitzer Prize winner in history. But how did you get involved with this January 6th documentary?
Well, when I was approached to offer my reflections on this event, I immediately said yes, because like many Americans, the morning of January 6th really stuck out in my mind because that was the day that the nation was celebrating the election of Jon Ossoff in Georgia, as well as Reverend Raphael Warnock. And what that meant symbolically for these two men to represent the state of Georgia, a Black preacher who was at King's own church, and Jon Ossoff as a Jewish American coming from the South, was such a reminder of what is possible when the right to vote is respected, when the mobilization happens in places where people are yearning for change. And all of the goodwill of those two historic elections just dissipated within hours when those images from the Capitol were broadcast to the nation.
Now, on that day, do you remember where you were and what you were doing when you witnessed what you saw?
Absolutely. I am a Washingtonian in many ways, having lived here for over a decade. I'm a politics junkie. I'm someone who's very concerned about the rhetoric around the 2020 election. And so I was watching cable news nonstop for several weeks after the 2020 election. And so watching that, and also as someone who lives in the District of Columbia, I became very vigilant about the types of people that were coming into the nation's capital at that time. I think that it's easy for people to imagine the nation's capital as just a configuration of government buildings and the White House and the Capitol and the Supreme Court. But there are those of us who live here, and we were very troubled by the paraphernalia that was worn by a number of people who were coming into town, the buses and the pickup trucks and the cars that had all sorts of pro-Trump, anti-election slogans. And so in many ways, we were all very vigilant. We were told to not go into the center of the city because there was a sense that something ominous was going to happen. I don't think we could have imagined the extent of what unfolded that day.
Where do you think, since you're a political junkie, where do you think this country is going as it pertains to democracy?
Well, I think that, this documentary is called Preserving Democracy, but I think that it really could also be called In Search of Democracy. I think that we have never really fully given the idea of democracy a chance in its fullest articulation, because we have had a nation that professes democracy in the face of slavery. We've had a nation that believed that you can have Jim Crow and democracy in the same place. We continue to live in a country in which race and economic status overdetermines someone's life chances, from their health and well-being to their education to the possibilities for future generations. So I can just say that this moment is not a reminder about the fragility of democracy so much as a challenge to say, if we were to truly pursue all of the avenues of a democratic state, what things would we no longer worry about, and what will we feel like we will never see again? And so I think we're still in that searching place, but I think the past few years have really forced us to say, how does this moment require all of us to step up and do our part?
Dr. Chatelain, what do you believe the producers of this 2-hour documentary that will air tonight on PBS at 9 p.m. Eastern Time and on the app at 8 p.m., what do you hope their goal is? And I ask this question because some people, when they hear this, they're like, well, I've seen all the news stories. I was present. But this is more than that, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, you can watch the congressional hearings about January 6th, and you could keep up on the news. But I think what this documentary provides is access to the insight, the frame in which this happened. It is not just the story of the 21st century. It's the story of the long struggle for voting rights. It's the story of the abolition of slavery and the story of the Civil War. It's so many layers. And I think that in our current news landscape, we rarely have the space to do the kind of learning and reflecting necessary when something so upsetting and so upending happens to everyone. But we rarely have the public spaces for people to really sit and consider what just happened.
Dr. Chatelain, you just mentioned it's layers, and it is. Do you think it's too much layers for the average American to really absorb it, as far as, now really, can all these things really have come together to make this happen? Do you think there's a way that, because the documentary, I didn't see Democrat or Republican. I just saw factual information about what transpired and the past and the present. So I thought that was really, really well done.
Well, of course people can understand, because, we understand our own lives as layers. We know what impact the families we grew up in had on us, and we know the impact of having certain material comforts and not having those comforts did. So when we think about our own lives and the complexity of influences and moments and circumstance and chance and luck and hard work and perseverance and disappointment and mistakes we've made, we know that that is what what makes a human life. And in the same way, when we look at the life of a nation, it requires us to think about all of these issues together. And I don't think that we are at a moment where we can really like skip over the difficult parts. It's the skipping over that has gotten us to this place. And I think that with the tragedies of COVID-19 and with the political climate being so toxic and people suffering so much, I think that this is a time that this piece of work can really bring people together for a common conversation about what ails us and what we want to see for the future.
Dr. Chaterlain, what did you personally add to this? Because you were all throughout it. For those that haven't seen it, obviously, us in the media have gotten a preview of it. What are the things that you talked about that specifically as it pertains to preserving democracy, pursuing a more perfect union?
Well, I think that as a historian, when I look at any situation, I'm, thinking of it in three modes. I'm analyzing what's happening in front of me, and I'm thinking about all of the moments that feel familiar from the past. This type of conflict reminds me of this election, or this type of mouthpiece reminds me of this person in the past. But I also think that one of the reasons why history is so important, it allows us to imagine a more creative future. So I think if I were talking to my students about this moment, what would I need them to understand in order for when it's their time to lead, that they will do something different? And so I think that, what I hope everyone gains from watching this film is just how important the accurate and thoughtful teaching of history is, because we know that there is a war not just on accurate history, but particularly Black history. And so when we are aware of the implications of what does it mean to erase Black people from the fundamental story of the development of the idea of the United States of America, we are better prepared to say, no, we can't allow that to happen. And so all of this, as difficult as it is making us stronger in order to take on the fights that are ahead of us.
So after January 6th in your class at Georgetown, what were the questions? What was the discussion? And that's real time right there, no cameras.
It's hard. I mean, it is really hard to leverage the optimism and the excitement and the intellectual curiosity students have when they are living in a world in which they see these things unfold. One of the great narratives of the American electoral process that I grew up with was this idea of the peaceful exchange of power. And as much as I can be incredibly critical of the United States and its myths and its narratives, there was something about the fact that we could have an inauguration day where people from either the same or different political parties could just, share power and end it that way. That was always, I think, kind of comforting. And, January 6th said, no, that may not be so easy this time. And I think for my students, they're young voters. For some of them, they voted for the first time in 2020. They are seeing a world in which they're told that voting is important and voting matters. And they also see that bullies and demagogues can just invalidate elections using rumors. And so I think that particularly working and teaching in Washington, D.C., so many of our students want to go into public service. They want to do things for the greater good. And it's discouraging, but I think it gives them a more realistic view of what that commitment to service means. And hopefully it'll provide them an opportunity to know that their service has to be connected to some broader and larger issues.
Now, so from a external view, it seems like you would be honestly almost preaching to the choir. They're interested in politics. They're interested in the community. They're interested in giving back. How about the people? I want to know your thoughts about people that aren't history buffs or aren't interested in politics, because they play a critical role in where the country moves from here.
I think it is easy for us to think that there are people who, just are not interested. But I think what they are just not engaged in the right ways. I think that everyone is interested in their future. Everyone's interested in their paycheck. Everyone's interested in the health and safety of their communities. I think what we need to do, and this is why public history is so important, this is why these documentaries are so important, is to say, if you are concerned about these issues, let me tell you why this is such a struggle for you. Let me tell you the origin story of why you are confronting these barriers today. And maybe this gives you some insight on how to move around them or how to come together in community and tear them down. We are all interested parties in the study of history. I think that it is unfortunate that because there's been such a hijacking of what history does, people are not able to see themselves in the process of learning really thoughtful and accurate history.
So do you blame Trump for what happened on January 6th? Do you believe he's at fault?
100. I mean, and his enablers. Listen, Donald Trump's greatest victory in his life was to always mobilize and manipulate people who had less power than him to do his dirty work. This has been the entire shape of his career. And so it's interesting to see the ways that his essential bullying of the nation has created all of these catastrophes, all of these calamities, all of these COVID deaths, and real challenges in the economy. I mean, this man operates on the ability to make everyone collateral damage. And so, of course, he's responsible for it. But I am as angry at Donald Trump as I am around a climate, news media, centrists, liberals, conservatives, whoever was in service of suggesting that either Trump was not that bad, had something to say and should be listened to, was reasonable, was maybe speaking to a part of America that needed to be legitimated. All of them, I think, are responsible for January 6th. And for those of us who knew better, we made it very clear that this was unacceptable. But anyone who allowed Trump to push the line further and further, they should feel incredibly guilty, and they should really be remorseful for what happened on January 6th.
You know, I wonder, I think the country before Trump became president, you know, if you had something, you kind of been and bared it, you had etiquette and you understood, you know, you could have a difference of opinion, but you don't get into the family and talking about people like you would a backyard brawl. But it seems like that Trump awoke something in people in this country. And he started out with little sprinkles of saying things. And then people would tell me, oh my goodness, Hitler did this, or Hitler used this word, or another person. And if you weren't paying attention, it would have just zoomed over your head. Someone like you, someone in your class, they were probably, okay, starting to connect the dots and saying, this is getting kind of serious. It was also interesting to see where sometimes he would say something and they would literally get the video of him saying the exact opposite the next day. And there was no fallout. And that even goes into a number of Republicans that for the first time that I'm hearing from the public, it seems that a number of Republicans are willing to not even respond to a question when, like I asked you, do you blame Donald Trump? They rather keep their position in Congress than to speak about Trump. Where are your concerns politically regarding that? Because we still have a possible 2024.
I think everyone needs to go into timeout. Like everyone needs to go into a barrel of dry rice and just simmer down, because it's a mess. I mean, I think that the cynicism of it is one thing. The racism of it is another thing. But, I think that I was not able to fully understand just how sick and toxic white supremacy was until the election of Trump. And I was actually surprised that Donald Trump was elected, not because I didn't think he reflected the will of a certain segment of the country. I just thought that people who had spouted values about loving America so much thought that America was so precious that even it should be protected from Trump. But they don't care, because this man is all chaos all the time. He didn't have the intellectual capacity to run the country. He didn't have the sophistication to manipulate forces to give the image of order while he was doing chaos. It was pure chaos all the time. And so I thought for the segment of the country that did believe in racism, that did believe in erecting barriers, I thought that they wanted that leadership to be more subtle, but they didn't even care. And so they didn't care so much that we have hundreds of thousands of people who have died of COVID. And that didn't really inspire them either. And so if you can think about the most extreme circumstance, and I would say a global pandemic is the most extreme circumstance. And even in that context, they couldn't get in front of him to say, stop it. Like, this is wrong. Or maybe we should push back against this guy. Maybe we should topple him because he had so many Twitter followers, because he could get votes. I mean, I think that
73 million people. That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people who didn't care. And so, I think that what it means is that we understand that politics is a terrain of such emptiness that I think a lot of thoughtful people have found other places in which to lead and to build communities. But until we have a national reckoning of accountability, of people asking the American people for forgiveness for enabling so much death and destruction, we will continue to have a cycle of obfuscation, of gaslighting, of pretending it wasn't that bad, of inaccurate histories that are written and told. I mean, in 20 years, when my son asks me, what was it like the year before I was born or the year I was born, I will have to say to him that the city in which he was born, white nationalists and white supremacists openly marched. They did whatever they wanted. People didn't think it was that big of a deal, and the president of the United States encouraged it. And I don't know if the world that my son is going to grow up in will be a world in which that story sounds like a falsehood, or that story checks out because of what he has to deal with as a grown-up.
I think when, then Donald Trump, the business owner, entered the race, it was a joking matter. And some say in his circle, it really was until it got serious. Mm-hmm. And I think it was it appeared a mixture of perfect timing, right? He would say things, just whatever. I mean, it was almost like, you have a conversation around friends and family at the kitchen table, and not to say that in public. And it seemed like he sold it as, listen, I'm just telling the truth. I'm just being honest. Mm-hmm. And I think for a level of Americans, because there have been comments that he said that, honestly, I've once said myself, I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, if he could say one thing that would make me say, gosh, I can kind of feel that. I can imagine what all of his followers are thinking with all the other things that he's saying that are not dealing with, obviously dealing with race. And it was just the perfect timing, I think, of him seeing, okay, so this works, and I'm going to keep going down this route, mm-hmm. because it changed everything from talking about people and your clothes and I literally did, it was as a news journalist, it was overwhelming because I felt silly at some points talking about what I had to talk about, but it was the news. It's what happened. It's what people saw and what people heard, either from someone else or actually the actual audio. What are your perspectives on that as we move into this 2024? Is it possible that there is something that can click for the 73 or so million people? We have the committee that's looking into the January 6th insurrection. Do you think that's going to change anything? Is it, people are saying it's just a waste of money. Some, obviously. Will they be able to get to the bottom and to do something that this never happens again? Do you feel?
I mean, I think the best that we can hope for is a climate in which people will realize the costs and the damages of this behavior. And I don't know if they will publicly admit to it, but I think that they just need to find a space to say, you know what, that was a bad move. Let's try something else. That's the best I think we can hope for. But I think the problem is that we now have an entire media landscape that is designed around misinformation, knowingly suggesting things to people because it gets ratings, because there are sponsors who like that. And so I think that because it's so deeply implicated into a very lucrative economy, it will be very difficult for us to grow from that moment. But I also know that the average voter is a fickle person and can change their mind very quickly. I've never understood this because I've been my whole life so deeply partisan in the sense that I kind of know what I want to vote in. But there are people who voted for Obama, who vote for Trump, who knows who they'll vote for next, right? Because I think that their own political education is so immediate. They don't listen to all the buzz. A couple of days before the election, they make a decision. And whoever is making the case for where they are, they make the case. But I think that the onus then falls on leaders because they have that power and that privilege with the American people to lead them towards something of substance. And that's the most that we can ask for. I think that there's a lot of people in Washington who should feel deeply ashamed of themselves because they not only were risking the lives of everyday people by allowing Trump to become the leader of their party and then president of the United States, they not only facilitated the deaths of millions of people because of their inattention to COVID and their COVID lies, they now have such disregard and indifference towards the people they work with, to their own staff members, to their own colleagues, that they would invite such violence and destruction in the workplace, knowing that those groups of people, for the grace of God, could have murdered so many of them. And even in the face of that reality, would still go on television and lie to the American people. I mean, that is a really kind of profound reality that we have to all live with.
Now, I do have a question that came in. The question is, how important is objectivity to the typical American's ability to accept the presentation of history?
So I think that what people don't understand is that true history, history that goes beyond the recitation of facts and dates, is about lenses. And so whichever lens you bring to history, you will get new levels and new insights. And so you can say that Martin Luther King Jr. rose to prominence because of his leadership of the Montgomery bus boycott, or you could also say Rosa Parks was kind enough to let Martin Luther King Jr. take front and center stage of the Montgomery bus boycott, which was a reflection of her decades of activism. Both of those facts are true, but the lens and the filter that we place on the Montgomery bus boycott allows us to see and understand different things. And I think that right now what we need in history is as many lenses and as many filters as possible, because we are starving for the insight that history can provide.
Dr. Chaterlain, how much do you blame social media?
I don't blame social media for anything. I blame I blame people for it. And I'll tell you why I don't blame social media for it. Because even before the rise of social media, misinformation has been a reality. What social media does is make it more efficient and make it more targeted. So the methods of social media make it worse, but liars have always been with us, and they understand the value and the power of lying. In 1964, 3 civil rights workers were missing while part of SNCC's Freedom Summer. When authorities came to search for the missing civil rights workers, local people in the press said, they're all actors. None of this is real. They're just sent in from New York to make people in the South look bad and make it seem like Mississippi has a civil rights problem. There were a group of people who took pictures of civil rights activists and they photoshopped them and they said, oh, these young people aren't here for civil rights. They're just trying to have sex with each other. This is fake news, 1964 style. Now, the problem is now the fake news comes in a computer that once it sees that you visit one site, it can keep on feeding you more fake news. And that's the problem, the repetition and the efficiency. And then it can bring you in community with other people who believe these lies. So social media is a problem, but the fundamental problem is the seductive quality of these kinds of lies as a way to not take responsibility for really confronting social injustice.
And I'm actually surprised to hear you say that, considering what's going on with Facebook, knowing what they knew and put out there. And I mean, they had the power to take down things. Even I understand free speech, and I absolutely, as a journalist, understand and respect that. But there are so many things that seem like it was money driven to allow things that they knew were not.
Absolutely. Oh, I see what you're saying. So yes, the need. Well, are they utilities? Are they media companies? Are they, information networks? Whatever they are, they catered to an audience. And so I put them in the kind of category of the other liars.
Okay.
They are just as bad as anyone spreading a false rumor. They're using their authority, their resources, and their capacity to spread lies. And they have to be held accountable because all of these things have consequences. And so, I think the problem with social media is we're not quite sure what it is. Is it an entertainment product? Is it a news product? Is it something in between? Or all of the above? Absolutely.
Yeah, you're right. It's all. So tonight, again, I keep saying this, this is obviously Dr. Marcia Chaterlain, and she is a Georgetown professor, and she's also the winner of the 2021 Pulitzer Prize in History. And she's also one of the contributors to PBS's program tonight that airs at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 p.m. on the PBS app, called Preserving Democracy, Pursuing a More Perfect Union. So I want you, Professor Chaterlain, to give us a challenge. After we see this, what do you challenge everyone who watches this 2-hour PBS special to do personally?
I just want you to talk to someone about what you learned. And I don't want you to post it on Facebook. I don't want you to start a fight with someone on Twitter. I want you to have a human conversation. Pick up the phone, go out to your porch from safe distances, talk to someone and say, I saw this thing and I'd like to tell you about it. I want you to, I learned this thing, or I thought about this thing for the first time and I want to share that with you. Let this be a moment to remind us the importance of human connection.
Well, again, Dr. Marcia Chaterlain, I have to thank you for joining us. The first show of 2022. And I'm telling you, mark your calendars, put your little timer on right now and make sure you're an hour or so away, depending on where you are in the country and in the world, to see this. PBS, 9 o'clock tonight, Eastern Standard Time, or 8 p.m. on PBS's app. Again, Dr. Marcia Chaterlain, thank you so much for your information. And that will do it for tonight's edition of Black Press USA and NNPA's FIRE. Until next week, God bless and goodbye.